Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, March 8th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Progressives say vote yes on Syria resolution. So, this is some good news. The Congressional Progressive Caucus is urging all of its members in the House of Representatives to vote yes on the Syria War Powers resolution that was introduced by Representative Matt Gaetz. And it's scheduled to be voted on Wednesday. And this resolution would direct President Biden to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria within 180 days. According to The Intercept, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the CPC for short, they circulated a message to its 100 members in the House. So it's a good chunk of House Democrats that are a member of this caucus. So this is significant. And the message said that the effort is consistent with previous bipartisan efforts that were led by members of this caucus to terminate the U.S. presence in Syria after 1 year. So again, Gaetz's resolution is 180 days, which is about half of a year. And what they're referring to here was in July 2022, when Jamal Bowman, who's a Democrat from New York, he introduced an amendment to the 2023 National Defense Authorization Act to get out of Syria within a year if the president doesn't authorize the presence. And that amendment failed, but it was supported by 60% of House Democrats, 130 House Democrats, 30 more than are in this caucus. So again, this is significant. I think, this might mean that we will see a good Democrat turnout for this vote. When it comes to Republicans, I'm not sure. Again, only 25 voted on this similar amendment over the summer. But here, we have Gaetz leading it, and, there could be some work going on behind the scenes to get more Republicans in favor of it. But either way, this is a good sign. And it's just good to see, the progressive Democrats and, the right wingers in Congress coming together on this issue. I mean, it's just great to see. So Robert Ford, who served as the ambassador to Syria during the Obama administration, he supports Gaetz's resolution. And I think a big part of the reason why this caucus is in favor of it is because he is in favor of it. And if just one note about the caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, they were the ones a few months back who sent a letter to the Biden administration kind of politely asking them to start thinking about diplomacy with Russia. And they actually retracted it after they got huge backlash. And then just a few days or weeks later, you had Mark Milley, the highest ranking U.S. military officer, saying that, the U.S. should start thinking about negotiations. Ukraine should start thinking about negotiations with Russia. So you had the progressive Democrats say it first, but then retract the letter. So that whole thing was really just a disaster. But it's good to see them be, on the right side of the Syria resolution. But anyway, so this Robert Ford guy, who was the ambassador to Syria for a few years during the Obama administration, he sent a letter to Congress urging them to vote yes. And according to The Intercept, Ford argued that the withdrawal would force negotiations that could bring stability to the region, including the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces negotiating a power-sharing deal with the government of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. If you remember when Trump said he was going to pull out of Syria in 2019, the talking point from people condemning the move was saying that, what about the Kurds? What about the Kurds? Well, the Kurds have always said that they're willing to, engage with Damascus, sign a deal with Syria. They would probably still remain, semi-autonomous, and they've signaled that they're willing to do it. And here we have this former Obama era official, saying that as well. So again, I just put in the information here that Americans, so the vote is scheduled for 5:30 Eastern time on Wednesday. So if you didn't call your representatives on Tuesday, you have all day Wednesday to do it. I actually have to call mine again. McClellan is her name. She was just sworn in on Tuesday because McEachin, who was my other representative here in Virginia, he died a few months back, so they had to have an election. And she was just sworn in yesterday, and I called and they didn't have a phone going, so hopefully they'll have it tomorrow. Maybe it'll be her first call. Who knows? But anyway, what was interesting, I also wanted to mention is, I'm always going on about the sanctions on Syria, which are very cruel. And the House did just overwhelmingly vote to maintain these sanctions after the earthquake. So Ford, who, during the Obama administration, he really favored heavy, he wanted the US to really intervene in Syria, big proponent of that. He's now saying that sanctions should be, it's time to start rethinking the strategy of sanctions. He said, this is in comments to The Intercept. He said, quote, "I would say just two things. First, the sanctions are not delivering political concessions from Assad. And then the second thing I would say, it's disingenuous for those who justify the sanctions to say that they don't harm ordinary Syrians living in government-controlled territories. They obviously do. All I can say is we're inflicting pain without getting much for it," end quote. So again, I think it's a good sign. Former Obama era official who apparently has some sway over members of Congress saying something like that. Maybe the next thing is going to be a push to try to end the sanctions. All right. So the next one, I just left up kind of the general article about that the vote is going to be on Wednesday, and that'll be updated, when the vote happens and all that. But then the one after that is another update on the Israeli airstrike on Syria. So an Israeli airstrike that hit the Aleppo International Airport in Syria on early Tuesday, it halted aid flights into the city that are needed for earthquake relief. This is according to a Syrian official speaking to AFP. So the strike hit the airport early in the morning on Tuesday, like I just said, about 1 month after an earthquake devastated Aleppo. And the city had already been struggling to rebuild after years of war. The city was destroyed by war, destroyed by earthquake, and now Israel's bombing their airport. And this official in the Syrian transport ministry said that it's no longer possible to receive aid flights until the damage has been repaired. He said more than 80 aid flights had landed at the Aleppo airport since the earthquake hit. In a statement, the Syrian Transport Ministry said the aid flights would be rerouted to airports in Damascus, and the Syrian Foreign Ministry called the strike a double crime because it hit a civilian airport and a key channel for the arrival of earthquake aid. So, it's just an update. I mentioned it yesterday that airport was receiving aid, and now here they are saying that it can't anymore because of the strike. So, and this is the second Israeli airstrike since that earthquake hit Syria. And again, Aleppo was really damaged by it. So just the fact that they're still bombing that is just really awful. All right. So the next one, the New York Times reported on Tuesday that a pro-Ukrainian group was likely responsible for the Nord Stream sabotage. So this appears to be the response to the Nord Stream report from Seymour Hersh, who his report said that President Biden ordered the sabotage. And then the New York Times comes out and they quote anonymous U.S. officials who are claiming that the bombings were carried out by a pro-Ukrainian group. So the officials told the New York Times that they based their assessment on new intelligence, but they offered very little detail about their claims. To read from the New York Times report, it said, quote, the officials declined to disclose the nature of the intelligence, how it was obtained, or any details of the strength of the evidence it contains. They have said that there are no firm conclusions about it, end quote. So, it's a very vague claim. And they are saying that there's no evidence tying Zelensky or any of his top advisors to the pipeline bombings. They're, hinting at Ukrainian involvement here, calling it a pro-Ukrainian group. But they also said they didn't know much about the group, suggesting only that they were opponents of Putin and likely Ukrainian or Russian nationals. So the New York Times, they briefly mentioned Hersh's report, and it's the first time that they did since it was published. But they only mentioned it to say that U.S. officials deny that there was a U.S. role. The Times report reads, quote, U.S. officials say Mr. Biden and his top aides did not authorize a mission to destroy the Nord Stream pipelines, and they say there was no U.S. involvement, end quote. And, that's it. Again, just a brief description, just a brief little thing about how Hirsch had the report and then the U.S. denial. So basically what this is, this is just basically a press release from somebody within the U.S. government. They wanted to put this out as a counter narrative, I guess, to the Hirsch report. But again, there's just such little detail. I mean, you read the Hirsch report, everything's very detailed. It says that U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on the Nord Stream pipelines in June 2022 under the cover of NATO exercises in the Baltic Sea. It said the operation was carried out with the coordination of Norway and that a Norwegian spy plane detonated the explosives by dropping a sonar buoy in late September 2022. U.S. officials told the Times that it appeared the explosives were planted on the pipeline. So they also said explosives were planted by experienced divers, but they claimed that these divers did not appear to be working for military or intelligence services, although they added that it was possible that they received specialized government training in the past. So again, they're not really saying it. They're saying that they don't know. I don't get how they can determine that it wasn't somebody working for an intelligence service at this point if they know so little about the group. So I don't know. It just seems like an effort to deflect blame. And the Times said that some of the U.S. officials acknowledged that Ukraine and its allies had the most logical motive for bombing the pipelines. Of course, because the U.S. has long opposed the construction of Nord Stream 2, and President Biden threatened to bring an end to the pipeline if Russia invaded Ukraine. So after the sabotage, U.S. officials celebrated it. This is just an example of the motive. Antony Blinken called it a tremendous opportunity to get Europe off Russian gas. So at least these officials are acknowledging that, and they're saying, Russia is not the culprit. Even when it first happened, there were all these insinuations in the media that Russia was behind it. But really what I think these vague allegations are an effort to kind of divert the suspicion from the U.S. to Ukraine, maybe. Because if this was confirmed that the U.S. was behind the attack, it would clearly be considered an act of war against Russia. Also, a German newspaper, Die Zeit, also on Tuesday, they published a report on the pipeline sabotage. Their report claimed that German investigators believe it was carried out by 6 people, not specifying what kind of people, using a yacht that was rented in Poland and that was owned by 2 Ukrainians. So another trace to Ukraine. And that was the title of the report was something like that it's traced to Ukraine. So, and these come, after, of course, got to point this out. After President Biden hosted German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Washington, and this visit did not include a customary joint press briefing. They didn't, hold a press conference after they met, like world leaders usually do when they hold a meeting. And the last time Scholz was in Washington was February 7th, 2022, and that was when Biden threatened to bring an end to the pipeline. And according to Hirsch, the people planning the attack thought that was Biden, outright admitting that they were planning to destroy the pipelines. So again, if you guys, listen to this show, you might have heard me, kind of naively say that I hope some people at the New York Times might try to see what they can do to confirm Hirsch's report, but it seems like they're just being stenographers for the people within, the U.S. government that want to put this narrative out there. All right, so the next one here, China warns of a conflict if the U.S. does not change course. So China's new foreign minister on Tuesday warned Beijing and Washington are headed for conflict and confrontation if the U.S. doesn't change course on its military buildup in the Asia Pacific and other policies that are aimed at China. So this is Foreign Minister Qin Gang, who was recently sworn in. He said, quote, if the United States does not hit the brake but continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing, and there surely will be conflict and confrontation. Who will bear these catastrophic consequences? Such competition is a reckless gamble, with the stakes being the fundamental interests of the two peoples and even the future of humanity, end quote. So he's talking about catastrophic consequences because the reality is a war between the US and China would be catastrophic for the entire world. It could go nuclear. And even if it doesn't, it's the two largest economies, going to war. That would have a huge impact on the world. And his comments, and this is Kin's comments, they came a day after Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, offered rare direct criticism of the U.S. in a speech to China's legislature. And it's rare. He usually does not directly criticize the U.S. And sometimes he'll say, "Oh, certain countries are doing things," but here he directly calls out the U.S. for trying to contain China. She said, quote, "Western countries led by the United States have implemented all-around containment, encirclement, and suppression of China, which has brought unprecedented severe challenges to our country's development," end quote. So Kin echoed Xi's comments when he discussed the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, which calls for the U.S. to build up its military and diplomatic presence in the region to counter China. He said that this strategy is, quote, "an attempt to gang up to form exclusive blocs, to provoke confrontation by plotting an Asia-Pacific version of NATO, and to undermine regional integration through decoupling and cutting chains," end quote. He warned U.S. efforts to build alliances in the region could lead to a conflict similar to the war in Ukraine. He said, quote, "No Cold War should be reignited and no Ukraine-style crisis should be repeated in Asia," end quote. So Kin, in his new post, he's actually junior. So he's the foreign minister, but he's junior to Wang Yi, who is the Communist Party's top foreign policy official. So Wang Yi is technically Blinken's, counterpart. But still, Kin is in a very influential position. And he took his post after serving as the Chinese ambassador in Washington. And during his time in the U.S., he also warned, as I've covered a lot, he also warned that a conflict between the U.S. and China could break out if the U.S. keeps taking steps to increase ties with Taiwan. But he also brought a message of good relations, and he stressed on Tuesday that Beijing wants to get on a better track with Washington. He said, quote, "China will continue to follow the principles put forth by President Xi Jinping, namely mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation," end quote. So regarding Taiwan, Kin said that the issue is the first red line that must never be crossed. And he's repeating something that Xi told President Biden when they met in Indonesia in November. But the U.S. is not heeding China's warnings as they continue to take steps to increase military and political support for Taiwan, even though China is responding by increasing military pressure on Taiwan. So they're saying they're doing this in the name of deterrence, but it seems like it's making a conflict more likely. And overall, the Biden administration has shown little interest in really working things out with China. They frame their engagement with Chinese officials as a managing of competition rather than an effort to solve issues. So there you have it. China explicitly warning, war is coming if the U.S. continues down this path. And we're always talking about the U.S. buildup in the Asia Pacific, a lot of U.S. military officials speak like war with China is inevitable. And they talk about it differently than Russia. They talk about it as if it's going to be a direct war, which is something that, should be unthinkable, again, because of nukes. That's just as simple as that. This could turn into, a world-ending conflict. All right. So the next one here, over in Iraq, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said that U.S. forces are there to stay. So Austin made an unannounced visit to Iraq on Tuesday. And the U.S. currently has about 2,500 troops based in Iraq to help the Iraqi government fight ISIS. Austin's visit, it came ahead of the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. That's March 20th. And of course, that destabilized the region and it led to the rise of ISIS. 20 years later, the U.S. is still in the country, using ISIS to justify its continued presence. So Austin's told the media, quote, "I should underscore that U.S. forces are ready to remain in Iraq at the invitation of the government of Iraq to support the Iraqi-led fight against Daesh, which is ISIS," end quote. So the U.S. presence in Iraq, it's a divisive issue in the country. Many are opposed to U.S. troops being stationed there. Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed el-Sudani, he came out in favor of a continued U.S. presence earlier this year, back in January. And that was after he kept relatively silent about the issue. He didn't really talk about it until then. He came into office, I think, in October 2022. So Austin traveled to Baghdad to meet with al-Sudani and Iraq's defense minister. And according to the Pentagon, they renewed their mutual commitment to long-term defense cooperation. So al-Sudani's predecessor, Mustafa al-Kadhimi, he was under a lot of pressure to get U.S. forces to leave. He came into office a few months after the U.S. drone strike in Baghdad that killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general who was the head of the Quds force. And that strike also killed Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis, who was the leader of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF. They're a group of mostly Shia militias that were formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. You know, they're a sworn enemy of ISIS. The U.S. was fighting on their side when they were really fighting a war against ISIS, when they actually controlled territory. But the U.S. ended up killing their commander after that. And because of this drone strike, Iraq's parliament voted to expel U.S. troops, but obviously they did not listen. So then Kadhimi was under a lot of pressure, trying to get the U.S. to leave, and it led to him working out a deal that the U.S. at the end of 2021, they said, "This is the end of our combat mission in Iraq. Now it's just an advisory role." But they didn't pull any troops out, and it's basically they're still doing the same thing. It's what they were doing before. And similar to Syria, keeping troops here is just a tripwire for war because, again, there's a lot of people opposed to the U.S. presence, and U.S. bases come under attack there. And also, this is part of a big part of the war in Syria, of the U.S. war in Syria, because the U.S. presence in Syria is supported by the bases in Iraq. There's always convoys going back and forth. They need these troops in Iraq to support that presence. So, and this comes after Mark Milley was just in Syria, reinforcing the, justifying the U.S. presence in Syria. So anyway, that's the next step. Once we get out of Syria, let's get out of Iraq. All right, the next one here. This is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. North Korea warns of realistic risk of nuclear war. So as the U.S. and South Korea prepare for massive war games next week, North Korea is forewarning nuclear war on the peninsula. In a statement, Pyongyang declared that the chances of nuclear war are a realistic one due to the irresponsible deeds of the U.S. and South Korea. So last week, Washington and Seoul announced their largest joint war games in 5 years, known as the Foal Eagle. Military drills, they will involve American strategic assets being deployed to the Korean Peninsula. Reaper drones will be deployed to South Korea for the war games as well, which will run from March 13th to the 23rd. 10 days. It's a long time. And last month, Pyongyang warned if Washington and Seoul resume their annual springtime war games, North Korea would turn the Pacific Ocean into a firing range. In 2018, so this is back 5 years ago, the U.S. and South Korea canceled these drills, the Foal Eagle military drills, to promote diplomacy with North Korea. But those days are over and everything is back on. So this is the quote from North Korea. They said, quote, "The danger of a nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula is turning from an imaginary stage to a realistic one due to the irresponsible deeds of the U.S. and South Korea, keen on the bellicose armed demonstrations," end quote. So yeah, we should expect to see some major tensions here with North Korea, firing missiles and testing other weapons. Things could really heat up. So of course, it seems to be the theme around the world, doesn't it? All right, the next one here. Hungary sent a delegation to Sweden, and they back Sweden's NATO bid. So a Hungarian parliamentary delegation visited Sweden on Tuesday and expressed support for the country's NATO bid, but they also told Swedish officials to stop telling lies about Hungary. So this was the deputy speaker of Hungary's parliament. He led the delegation. He said that most members of the Hungarian government support expanding NATO into Sweden. He said, quote, "We made it clear that the Hungarian government, the Hungarian president, and the vast majority of MPs unanimously support the NATO membership of Sweden," end quote. But he did also accuse Swedish officials of spreading false information about Hungary. He said, quote, "It would be good if in the future Swedish politicians, members of the government, MPs, and MEPs would avoid portraying Hungary in a false light by alluding to an absence of rule of law that is based on clearly untrue facts," end quote. So Hungary has been at odds with many of its fellow EU members, more so since Prime Minister Viktor Orban was reelected last year. And Hende, who is the guy I'm quoting here, the deputy speaker of Hungary's parliament, he's a member of Orban's Fidesz party. Some of the members of that party recently expressed opposition to Sweden and Finland joining NATO before this delegation was sent. Now they're saying, that they support it. And this delegation plans to visit Finland next to discuss the issue of the NATO membership. So Hungary's parliament is scheduled to vote on ratifying Sweden and Finland's memberships on March 20th, after delaying the vote for a few weeks. Hungary is the only NATO member besides Turkey that has yet to approve the two Nordic countries joining the alliance. And Turkey is still, I believe Sweden's going to have talks with them, but Turkey said recently that they weren't going to support Sweden's membership and said that they could just approve Finland without them. And Finland's the big one anyway. I mean, they have an over 800-mile border with Russia. Expanding NATO there is going to really increase tensions in the region. The last one here, this is an article from The Intercept, and it is alarming to me. It says U.S. Special Forces want to use deepfakes for psy-ops. So deepfakes are, videos of what look like people talking that are fake. Some of them are getting really good, and it's scary. And this report from The Intercept says that U.S. Special Operations Command, responsible for some of the country's most secretive military endeavors, is gearing up to conduct internet propaganda and deception campaigns online using deep fake videos, according to federal contracting documents reviewed by The Intercept. The plans, which also describe hacking internet-connected devices to eavesdrop in order to assess foreign populations' susceptibility to propaganda, come at a time of intense global debate over technologically sophisticated disinformation campaigns, their effectiveness, and the ethics of their use. While the U.S. government routinely warns against the risk of deepfakes and is open to working to build tools to counter them, the document from Special Operations Command represents a nearly unprecedented instance of the American government openly, or any government, openly signaling its desire to use the highly controversial technology offensively. So I think when it comes to psyops and things like that, I think the U.S. military is doing things so much more than most people realize. And this is an example. I mean, it seems like this is part of, kind of the new Cold War with China, is psyops and propaganda, and information war is going to be a big part of it. So, man, I definitely don't like the sound of that. But that's it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Galen Carpenter is weakening support for Ukraine following a historical pattern. One from John V. Walsh, February 19th, Rage Against War rally was a historic success. So it's about the rally and the coalition building and all that. One from Emil Nakla, if I pronounce that right. The Iraq war was dominated by groupthink and absolutely no humility. That is from Responsible Statecraft. Again, this is as we are approaching the 20th anniversary. One from Jacob Hornberger over at the Future Freedom Foundation. The Cold War racket is back. And our spotlight is from Connor Freeman over at the Libertarian Institute. The American people must draw red lines now. And that is it for me for today. You could always support us, antiwar.com/donate. Please, if you haven't already, and you're in the US, call your representative and say, hey, support this resolution, please. I know, it might seem a little silly and that, but I think we should just throw our support behind it. I think it's good, when anything like this, just to say, yeah, we support it, and to try to get other people to do that too, just because, can't be just too cynical about everything. But anyway, that's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thank you for listening.